"Happy birthday to my soon-to-be ex-wife," Caleb Rowan announced, sliding a manila envelope across the table toward me while his friends erupted into laughter. The restaurant went quiet around us, forks suspended midair, conversations dying on strangers' lips. I stared at the envelope, my 38th birthday cake sitting untouched between us, its candles still waiting to be lit. My name is Elena Hartwell, and I had spent the last 9 years married to a man who thought cruelty was comedy. We lived in Bend, Oregon, in a house I had helped pay for with my salary as a logistics coordinator at Redstone Freight Group. I had met Caleb at a coworker's backyard cookout when I was 29, drawn to his easy charm and the way he made everyone around him laugh. What I didn't realize then was that eventually, I would become the punchline. "Open it! Open it!" His friend Mason chanted, slapping the table. Beside him, Trent was already recording on his phone, capturing what they clearly expected to be my humiliation. Caleb sat back in his chair with that smug smile I had grown to despise, the one that said he had won something I hadn't even known we were competing for. I picked up the envelope with steady hands, a calmness settling over me that surprised even myself. Inside were divorce papers already filled out, with little sticky arrows pointing to where I needed to sign. Caleb had even highlighted the sections in yellow, as if I might miss them otherwise. "Took me weeks to plan this," Caleb said proudly. "Figured your birthday was the perfect time. You know, out with the old, in with the new." His friends howled with laughter again, and I noticed a few other diners looking at us with a mixture of horror and fascination. But what Caleb didn't notice, what none of his idiot friends seemed to register, was the man sitting at the end of our table. Elliot Vaughn had been quiet all evening, nursing a glass of red wine and watching the scene unfold with an expression I couldn't quite read. He was Caleb's cousin on his mother's side, visiting from Spokane, Washington, where he worked as an architectural designer. Tall, dark-haired, with a kind of quiet intelligence that made you want to lean in when he spoke. Everything Caleb pretended to be, Elliot actually was. As the laughter continued around me, Elliot leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sign them," he said. "Sign them, and then I can finally have my chance with you." I turned to look at him, really look at him, and something in his eyes made my heart skip. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't another cruel punchline. This was an offer. A lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The truth was, I had been drowning for years. I just hadn't admitted it to myself until that moment, sitting in that restaurant with divorce papers in my hands and a room full of people waiting to watch me fall apart. Caleb and I had started out like any other couple. There were flowers and romantic dinners and whispered promises about the future. He was charming when he wanted to be, the kind of man who could light up a room with his presence. But somewhere along the way, his charm curdled into something darker. The jokes at my expense started small. Little comments about my cooking or my weight that he brushed off as teasing. But they grew sharper over time, more pointed, until I found myself dreading social gatherings because I never knew when I would become the target. I had given up so much for this marriage. My friends had slowly drifted away, tired of being caught in the crossfire of Caleb's cutting remarks. My relationship with my own family had become strained because Caleb always found a reason to skip holidays or complain endlessly when we did attend. I had stopped pursuing a promotion at work because Caleb insisted my job was just a backup plan, and that I should focus more on keeping the house in order. The worst part was how long it took me to see it. When you're in the middle of it, when the manipulation is gradual and wrapped in just enough affection to keep you hooked, you don't realize you're being dismantled piece by piece. I had convinced myself that every married couple had problems, that Caleb's behavior was just his way of coping with stress, that things would get better if I just tried harder, loved more, gave more of myself. But things never got better. They only got worse. I had started noticing Elliot about 2 years earlier at a family reunion Caleb had reluctantly attended. While Caleb spent the afternoon complaining about the food and making snide comments about his relatives, Elliot had sat with me on the back deck and actually listened when I talked. He asked questions about my job, my interests, my dreams. He looked at me like I was a person worth knowing, not a prop in someone else's comedy routine. After that reunion, I found myself thinking about Elliot more often than I should have. Not in any inappropriate way, I told myself. I was married after all. But there was something about the way he treated me that highlighted just how poorly Caleb did. Elliot remembered details from conversations months later. He sent me articles about topics I had mentioned in passing. At family gatherings, he always made sure I had a drink and someone to talk to. I told myself it was nothing, that Elliot was just a kind person. But sitting in that restaurant with his words echoing in my ears, I wondered if I had been blind to something that had been building all along. Caleb was still laughing with his friends, completely unaware that his carefully planned humiliation was about to backfire. I looked down at the divorce papers again, at the highlighted signature lines and the sticky arrows pointing to my future. For 9 years, I had bent myself into shapes trying to fit into Caleb's version of what a wife should be. I had swallowed my pride, silenced my opinions, and shrunk myself down until I barely recognized the woman I had become. And for what? For a man who thought serving me divorce papers on my birthday in front of his friends was hilarious. You know what, Caleb? I said, my voice cutting through the laughter. You're absolutely right. This is the perfect birthday gift. I pulled a pen from my purse, the same pen I used to sign contracts at work authorizing shipments worth over $420,000. With deliberate calm, I flipped to the first signature page and signed my name. Then the second, then the third. The laughter around the table faded, replaced by confused silence. Caleb's smug expression flickered, uncertainty creeping in. What are you doing? He asked. Exactly what you asked me to do, I replied, not looking up as I signed the final page. I'm signing your divorce papers. Happy birthday to me. I slid the papers back across the table, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for so long suddenly lifted, and I could breathe again. Wait, no, that's not, Caleb sputtered. You were supposed to cry. You were supposed to beg. Why would I beg to stay married to someone who treats me like this? I asked calmly. You just handed me my freedom, Caleb. With witnesses. And for the first time in 9 years I stood up and walked away, smiling. The cool night air of Bend hit my face as I stepped outside the restaurant, the scent of pine and rain-soaked pavement filling my lungs. I hadn't realized how shallow my breathing had become until that moment. It felt like oxygen was finally reaching places inside me that had been starved for years. Elliot followed a few steps behind, not crowding me, not touching me, just there, present. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the asphalt, and for the first time that evening, the noise inside my head quieted. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? He asked gently as we reached our cars. The house is mine, I reminded him, the words coming easier now. Caleb can find a motel or sleep in his truck. I honestly don't care anymore. Elliot nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Would you like some company? Just to make sure he doesn't come back angry and cause a scene. I studied his face under the soft glow of the streetlights, searching for any hint of expectation, any pressure. There was none. Only concern. I'd like that, I said finally. We drove separately to my house, a modest 2-story craftsman I had bought on my own years before Caleb ever entered my life. It had a wide front porch, white trim, and a backyard maple tree that turned a deep, fiery red every fall. Somewhere along the way, I had let myself forget that this place was mine. Inside, Elliot helped me move quietly, methodically. Caleb's clothes came down from the closet. His shoes lined up by the door went into boxes. His expensive whiskey collection, purchased with money we never really had, was packed away without ceremony. With each item, something loosened inside my chest. Can I ask you something? Elliot said after a while. Of course. Has it always been like that? The way he treated you? I paused, holding a handful of socks over an open box. Not at first. At least it didn't feel that way. Started small. Oaks. Comments. By the time I realized how bad it was, I didn't know how to leave. Elliot set his box down and looked at me. I noticed. Family gatherings. The way you'd go quiet whenever he spoke. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know if it was my place. I swallowed. Why did you say what you said tonight? He met my eyes without hesitation. Because I've been in love with you for 2 years. And watching you shrink in that marriage was unbearable. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I never crossed a line, he added quickly. You were married. I respect that. But when he handed you those papers and expected you to break, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the living room wall. Caleb was home. The front door slammed open hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Caleb stormed in. His face flushed with rage, Mason and Trent trailing behind him like shadows. What the hell is this? Caleb shouted, his eyes darting from the boxes to Elliot. What are you doing in my house? It's not your house, I said calmly. We established that earlier. Your things are packed. Take them and leave. Caleb's face darkened. You can't just throw me out. We've been married for 9 years. Exactly, I replied. 9 years of being your joke, your outlet, your emotional punching bag. You wanted a divorce. You got one. Mason stepped forward. Hey, you can't talk to him like that. Elliot moved beside me, his presence steady. She absolutely can. This is her property, and she's asked you to leave. Caleb stared at him, realization slowly dawning. Wait, are you two? Have you been? I never cheated on you, I said sharply. Unlike you. His face went pale. Lena Cross, right? Continued. The receptionist at your gym. The hotel charges in Vancouver. The jewelry purchases that never came home. Silence filled the room. Even Mason and Trent avoided eye contact. You're going to take your boxes and leave, I said. The divorce papers are signed. You're getting nothing. Not this house, not my savings, not another minute of my life. Caleb opened his mouth, but I cut him off. And if you fight me, I have records. Every message. Every charge. Every public humiliation. I've been documenting for 2 years. You just didn't know it. Slowly, Caleb reached for a box. His friends grabbed the others. No one said a word as they carried his life out the door. I watched from the window as his truck pulled away, the taillights disappearing into the dark. Something inside me finally unraveled. I slept that night for the first time in years without anxiety pressing on my chest. The weeks that followed moved quickly. Lawyers, paperwork, meetings. My attorney called my documentation exceptional. Caleb tried to claim half the house, half my savings, even part of my retirement. None of it stuck. He was ordered to repay the debts he'd hidden, nearly $67,000, and walked away with nothing but his clothes and consequences. Elliot stayed longer than planned. First it was practical, then it wasn't. We took things slowly. Long walks, quiet dinners, conversations that stretched late into the night. He never rushed me. I'm not going anywhere, he told me one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the trees. I know, I said. That's why I trust you. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. I kept my house, my savings, my future. At a family celebration weeks later, I walked in holding Elliot's hand. Caleb was there. He froze when he saw us. Alone. Smaller somehow. You gave me the best gift of my life, I told him calmly when he confronted me. You gave me a way out. He didn't argue. He just walked away. Elliot and I built a life rooted in peace. We renovated the house together. Adopted a rescue dog. Laughed freely. Loved honestly. 1 year after that birthday dinner, Elliot took me back to the same restaurant. When he knelt and opened a small velvet box, I understood something clearly at last. The best revenge wasn't watching Caleb fall. It was living well. And finally knowing my worth. Life settled into something unfamiliar but welcome. Quiet. Not the tense silence that used to fill rooms after one of Caleb's jokes landed too hard, but a calm that felt earned. My mornings no longer began with a knot in my stomach. I woke up to sunlight filtering through the curtains and the sound of Elliot making coffee downstairs, humming softly to himself as if he wasn't afraid of taking up space. I returned fully to my work at Redstone Freight Group, throwing myself into projects I had once been discouraged from pursuing. Within weeks, my manager asked if I'd reconsider the regional operations role I had turned down 2 years earlier. This time I didn't hesitate. Accepted. The raise came with a new salary, just over $118,000 a year, and for the first time I felt proud instead of guilty about my success. Elliot never once made me feel small for it. When I told him, he smiled like he'd been waiting for this moment. "I always knew you were capable of more," he said. "I just needed someone to stop standing in my way," I replied. We moved carefully, respecting the weight of what I had just left behind. There were moments when old habits surfaced, when I apologized unnecessarily or asked for permission that wasn't required. Elliot noticed every time. He never scolded me. He simply reminded me gently that I was safe now. Caleb faded into the background of my life, though occasionally his name surfaced through mutual acquaintances. I heard he had tried to contest the debt ruling and failed, that he'd bounced between short-term rentals, that his charm no longer worked the way it used to now that people had seen behind the curtain. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing any of it, just distance. The first holiday season after the divorce was the hardest, and the most healing. For years, celebrations had revolved around Caleb's moods. Where he wanted to go, who he didn't want to see, what annoyed him. That December, Elliot and I hosted a small gathering at my house. Friends I hadn't seen in years filled the living room. Laughter echoed through the kitchen. Someone spilled wine and no one panicked. I realized how much of myself I had been holding back, afraid of upsetting the wrong person. Later that night, as the last guest left and the house settled into stillness, I stood in the doorway and looked around. This space felt different now. Lighter. Alive. "You built this," Elliot said quietly, reading my thoughts. "Not just the house. The life." I shook my head. "I forgot that for a long time." "You remembered," he replied. "That's what matters." In early spring, we took a trip to the Oregon coast. Nothing extravagant. Just a rented cabin, long walks on the beach, and conversations that didn't feel rushed or guarded. One evening, wrapped in blankets and listening to the waves crash against the shore, Elliot told me about his own past. The relationships he'd walked away from because something never felt right, the fear of loving someone who didn't see their own worth. "I think I was waiting for you," he said, almost embarrassed. I reached for his hand. "I think I was learning how to be ready." A year passed faster than I expected. The house changed with us. Fresh paint, new furniture, a garden Elliot insisted on planting even though neither of us had much experience. We learned together, failed together, laughed a lot. On the anniversary of the divorce being finalized, I received an unexpected email from Caleb. It was short, awkward, apologetic in a way that felt more tired than sincere. He said he hoped I was doing well, that he'd learned a lot. I didn't reply. Not out of anger but because I no longer needed to. Some chapters don't require a response. That night, Elliot and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same place where he had once promised he wasn't going anywhere. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I remember, if things hadn't been exactly the way they were, I might not be here now." He smiled. "I'm glad you are." So was I. Because the truth is, the story was never about divorce papers or humiliation or revenge. It was about remembering who I was before someone convinced me I was less. Caleb thought he was ending my life that night in the restaurant. Instead, he unknowingly handed me the beginning of it.